what if the most rational path isn't the one we choose for ourselves? What if, deep down, we secretly enjoy our own misery? Or maybe the sheer discomfort of defying logic just to assert our will? Today, we're venturing into the dark, complex, and, well, surprisingly humorous corners of the human mind. We're looking at Fyodor Dostoevsky's seminal work, Notes from Underground.
That's right. And our compass for this journey is a collection of really vivid excerpts from the brilliant Turkish translation Yeraltından Notlar.
Ah.
Specifically, we'll be drawing insights from the Hasan Ali Yücel Classic series. It includes a pretty profound preface from Yücel himself.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so this gives us a unique and I think really rich perspective on a text that's influenced, well, generations of thinkers and writers all over the world.
Okay, so our mission today is basically to excavate these profound insights, right? The surprising contradictions, the dark humor within this incredibly challenging work. We want to help you understand the mind of, well, one of literature's most perplexing characters, the underground man. We'll explore his twisted ideas, his perplexing actions, and what they ultimately reveal about, the human condition. All set against that perpetually damp and desolate backdrop of the Petersburg Sulaspin.
Oh, yeah.
That wet, sludgy snow that seems to cling to everything, including his very soul, it feels like. Okay, let's unpack this.
Indeed. It's a deep dive into the psyche of a character who doesn't just challenge our assumptions about human motivation. He actively readily in tearing them apart.
Right.
He's a man who finds his freedom, not in choosing what's good or logical, but in the radical act of choosing what is, by all accounts, harmful and, well, absurd.
So who is this man, this provocateur? He doesn't exactly ease us in.
Not at all.
From his very first words, the underground man introduces himself with this jarring, almost aggressive self-description. He states, Ben hasta bir adamım, kötü bir adamım, suratsız bir adamım ben. Which translates directly to, I am a sick man, I am a wicked man, an unattractive man. It's quite an opening, isn't it?
It really is.
He's laying all his cards on the table, immediately confessing to these vague health complaints, particularly karachirm den zorum var, or trouble with his liver. But then, almost immediately, he just pulls the rug out.
Yeah.
He insists, inadimdan tadavi olmak istemiyorum, which means, purely out of spite, I don't want to be treated.
And what's truly fascinating here is that this initial declaration isn't just about a physical ailment. Not really.
No?
No, it's a profound, defiant statement about his entire relationship with the world and really with himself. He's sick, but he refuses treatment out of sheer stubbornness, out of inandandan.
Right, that spite.
Exactly. This isn't just simple masochism. It's a conscious, perverse assertion of his will. He's choosing suffering, not because he enjoys the pain itself necessarily, but because it allows him to defy the conventional, rational expectation that you should just do what's good for you.
Huh. It's like a grotesque form of self-mastery then.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
A way of proving to himself that he is truly free, even in his degradation.
And despite claiming to respect medicine, even saying he's aşırı süde, mesela tıbba saygı ve slere kadar boşun şarabalıyım, meaning excessively superstitious, for example, to the point of respecting medicine, he then contradicts himself right there in the same thought. He openly admits, boş inançlara kapılmayarak kadar tahsil gördüm ama inanıyorum işte. I have enough education not to be superstitious, but I believe anyway.
Right.
How does this immediate jarring paradox right at the beginning prepare us for the mind we're about to explore? He's educated, but believes in superstitions. It completely undermines any expectation of him being, straightforward or rational.
Well, this immediate contradiction is absolutely crucial. He's not simply an uneducated brute or confused individual. He's an intellectual, acutely aware of his own inconsistencies, and he deliberately embraces them.
Okay.
This is the bedrock of his underground philosophy. The conscious rejection of the Enlightenment's emphasis on pure reason as the sole guide for human behavior.
I see.
He's showing us from the outset that he lives in this realm of paradox, where logic and irrationality are not opposites, but coexisting, often warring forces within him. He wants us to understand that his mind is a labyrinth, not a straight path.
He also recounts his past as a civil servant, describing himself as fena bir memurdum, a bad civil servant.
Yes.
And he actually kaba olmaktan zef alurdum, meaning he took pleasure in being crude. Now, you might expect him to have been truly malicious, right? Inflicting harm.
You'd think so.
But then he follows that up with this fascinating internal confession, almost a peek behind the curtain of his malice. He says, Gerçekte hiçbir zaman zararım dokunmadı onlara. İçimde bunların tam tersi bir sürü duygunun kaynaştığını hissederdim.
Which means?
It translates to, in reality, I never harmed them. I always felt a swirl of feelings within me, entirely opposite to these. So he enjoyed being crude, he cultivated this outward persona, but he never actually inflicted harm and even felt the opposite emotions swirling inside. What does that reveal about his true self?
Well, it highlights his profound self-awareness. Even in those moments of perceived malice, he knows his outward actions, his crude demeanor, they don't always align with his inner state.
Okay.
And he finds a strange, almost perverse satisfaction in this discrepancy. He's performing a role, acting out a resentment that he perhaps can't fully actualize. He's conscious of his own hypocrisy, and that consciousness itself becomes a source of both torment and, well, a peculiar pleasure. He describes feeling these contradictory emotions, howling inside me, he says, desperate to escape, but he deliberately suppressed them.
Wow.
It's like he's playing a game with himself, and the rules are constantly shifting. He wants to be wicked, he wants to be crude, but his intellect is just too sharp, too self-aware to allow him the simple pleasure of truly being so.
It's like he's wrestling with himself, and we, the audience, are privy to the entire messy internal brawl.
Pretty much.
And this struggle, this constant internal contradiction, leads to perhaps his most significant confession about his character. A declaration that really sets the stage for his retreat from the world. Yeah,
that's a key line.
Translated, that's, not only could I not be a wicked person, but I also couldn't manage to be anything else. Neither bad nor good, neither base nor honorable, neither a hero nor an insect. This isn't just self-deprecation, is it? It feels like the bedrock of his existential paralysis.
No, it's far more than self-deprecation. It's the profound admission of his inability to achieve a stable, definitive identity. He's incapable of fully committing to any defined identity or course of action. This inability to be definitive is what ultimately drives him into the underground, this state of perpetual inaction and intellectual stagnation. He views this as a curse of heightened consciousness. He argues that zeki insanlar asla bir baltaya sap olamaz. Olanlar yalnız aptayardır. Intelligent people can never be anything. Only fools can.
That's harsh.
It is. For him, intelligence leads to overthinking, to seeing too many angles, too many nuances, which then paralyzes the will. Simpler, more narrow-minded individuals, as he sees them, are capable of action and achievement precisely because they aren't burdened by such profound self-awareness and self-doubt. They can just be and do.
That's a truly brutal indictment of intellect. He seems to see it as a curse, not a gift. Why this radical belief that intelligence paralyzes action while only fools can truly achieve anything?
Well, because for the underground man, true intelligence forces you to see the inherent contradictions and, frankly, the absurdities in any course of action. If you analyze something enough, you can always find a reason not to do it, or a reason to question its purity. Fools, by contrast, act without this crushing self-awareness. They commit fully to their beliefs, however misguided, and so they achieve things, even if their achievements are, to the underground man's mind, fundamentally meaningless. It's his way of explaining his own inertia and self-loathing, really, blaming his intellect for his inaction.
And he really doubles down on his contempt for societal norms with this extreme declaration. Kırk yaşından fazla yaşamak ayıptır, bayağılık hatalıksızlıktır. To live beyond 40 is shameful, it's vulgar, even immoral.
Yeah, quite a statement.
He's 40 himself, and then provocatively asks who lives past 40, answering, aptalarla namussuzlar, fools and dishonest people. He even claims he'll live to 70 or 80 just to spite them. What does this radical statement reveal about his contempt for society and just the passage of time?
It's a multi-layered provocation, isn't it? Designed to shock. On one hand, it's a bitter self-indictment, a reflection of his own perceived failure to achieve anything significant by that age. On the other hand, it's a scathing critique of what he sees as the average human existence lived by convention without genuine thought or struggle.
Right.
He's effectively saying that beyond 40, most people just coast. They become morally compromised, or they lose that vital spark of self-assertion, reducing themselves to mere fools and dishonest people in his eyes.
So it's not just about the age 40.
No, it's not just a number. It's a metaphor for becoming domesticated, for losing that core, irrational fire he values so much, for succumbing to the banality of conventional life. And his declaration that he'll live even longer, just despite them, is a final, twisted assertion of his free will. Even his existence, simply by its duration, becomes an act of rebellion for him.
So with this mind just reeling with contradictions and a philosophy of self-imposed suffering, where do we actually find the underground man physically? Does his external life mirror his internal chaos?
Oh, absolutely. This twisted philosophical journey has led him to his current state. An eighth-grade civil servant who inherited some money, quit his job, and retreated to his Pokumu Kotubiro Odam terrible, bad room in Petersburg.
His underground.
Exactly. This physical withdrawal is a perfect mirror, a symbol for his psychological underground. The squalor of his physical environment reflects the chaos and degradation of his inner world. He embraces this exile, this retreat from society, as a chosen path.
Right.
He's not simply a recluse. He's a self-imposed exile who believes that to understand too much is, in itself, a disease. This hyper-awareness leads to a profound sense of suffering as he constantly analyzes and dissects every feeling and action, preventing him from ever truly living. He is, well, the ultimate armchair philosopher, paralyzed by his own intellect.
And this suffering, oddly enough, becomes a source of pleasure for him. You mentioned this earlier. He talks about a sinsi anormal adi birsavins, a sly, abnormal, base joy, in fully acknowledging his own degradation, the impossibility of changing his wretched state, the lack of any escape. He says, Bu, kutsul menitsiolanka, shidetile itrak et menen verdidi tiftirtir. This is the joy of realizing your own degradation with full intensity. That's a truly dark and unsettling thought.
It really is.
So the underground man finds pleasure not in suffering itself, but in the ultimate defiant act of consciously choosing his suffering. It's a grotesque form of self-mastery, like we said.
Precisely. This is where he delves into the perverse pleasures of the underground. For him, the complete awareness of one's own abasement, the recognition that there is no way out, no possibility of change, becomes a strange form of gratification. It's an intellectualized form of self-flagellation. He's not just suffering, he's aware of his suffering. And that heightened awareness, while painful, also offers a unique kind of dark exhilaration. It allows him to feel superior somehow to those who simply suffer passively.
And he gives a very specific and vivid example of this, a toothache. He says, a toothache has its own pleasure.
Yes, the toothache.
He describes the moans that come from it not just as expressions of pain, but as isin gelme and yapmachikle in lemeler, insincere, artificial groans. He argues these groans are a perverse pleasure because they are born of understanding the kusutuku geesisliini, demeaning aimlessness of the pain.
Right.
It's also a complaint, he says, against Tabiaranaya, Mother Nature, for her indifference. He pushes this further, saying it becomes shivate varan birsevk, a pleasure verging on lust. Can you break this down for us? What exactly is he getting at with this bizarre analogy?
This toothache analogy is one of the most striking and frankly disturbing examples of his philosophy. It's not about the pain itself, but the consciousness of the pain and the futile, defiant act of complaining about it to an indifferent universe.
Okay.
Think about it. A toothache is usually something we try to fix immediately, but the underground man says he deliberately lets it fester. He relishes the fact that others, like his family, would find his drawn-out artificial groans annoying, knowing full well that he could express his pain more simply, but chooses not to.
Right.
This is conscious self-punishment. A true pleasure, as he puts it, finding joy in secretly devouring myself. The pleasure verging on lust isn't a physical sensation of pleasure, not really. It's an intellectual, almost spiritual exhilaration derived from fully experiencing and controlling his own suffering in a way that defies all rational expectations of pain.
So it's about control again.
Absolutely. He finds a twisted freedom in this defiance, a way to assert his superiority over a mere physical sensation and even over Mother Nature herself.
And this all builds to a truly radical claim. He argues there's one situation, tekbir duum, where a man may purposefully, consciously desire something harmful, senseless, even utterly stupid.
Yes.
That situation is Yalnız akla uygun şeyler istemek zorunda kalmayıp ne kadar manasız olursa olsun istemek hakkına sahip olmak. To have the right to desire something, no matter how senseless, rather than being forced to desire only what is rational. This is where it gets really interesting. He's asserting a fundamental, irreducible right to irrationality.
This is the crux of his radical defense of free will. It's a direct challenge to the Enlightenment ideals of rational egoism and utopian visions that were so prevalent in his time.
Okay.
He rejects the notion that human beings will always act in their own rational self-interest if only they are enlightened enough, if only their true interests are revealed to them. This deterministic view that we are merely logical machines is what he truly despises.
Right.
He champions the human capacity for capriciousness, for defying our own perceived good simply because we can. It's a defiant roar against any system that seeks to perfectly predict or control human behavior.
And this ideal of perfectly predictable rational behavior is famously embodied in his critique of the Crystal Palace metaphor, isn't it?
Oh yes, the Crystal Palace.
This structure represents a utopian ideal, a society where humans, illuminated by reason, would always act in their true self-interest, leading to universal rifa, servet, hurriyet, rahatluk, welfare, wealth, freedom, comfort. It's an economic order, as he describes it, matematic bir kesinlikle hesaplanmış, calculated with mathematical precision. It's supposed to be perfect, logical, inevitable.
Precisely. This ideal, often associated with utopian socialists and rational egoists like Chernyshevsky in his novel What Is to Be Done, is a direct target for his critique. It represents a world so perfectly ordered by reason that there is no room for human will, for choice, for individuality, especially if that choice is irrational.
Right.
The underground man challenges the very foundation of Enlightenment optimism, specifically mentioning Buckle's theory that civilization softens humans. He asks, Medeniyet nemitsi yumushatmush. What has civilization softened in us?
Yeah.
He argues that civilization merely expands the dugu kishitleri variety of feelings, leading to more refined, even pleasurable forms of cruelty.
So instead of curing our worst impulses, civilization just refines them. He's suggesting that our dark side doesn't disappear. It just gets a more elegant disguise, leading to what he calls a more disgusting shedder of blood.
Exactly. He provocatively asks, Chinayat din insus talaklar gusterin rinchos, and medenia damlar oldu naisestikat etinismi. Have you ever noticed that those who show the greatest finesse in murder are often the most civilized people? He claims modern man is a daha kutu, daha ironsbir kandukuku, worse, more disgusting shedder of blood than his barbaric ancestors. He is arguing that an increased capacity for reason and complex thought doesn't necessarily lead to moral improvement. It simply provides more sophisticated tools for expressing our inherent depravity. This is a truly cynical, yet powerful, counter-narrative to the prevailing optimism of the 19th century.
That's a truly unsettling thought, and this leads to his concept of the unaccounted interest. He states that humans kananan istedi gibi harakat and meisever always love to act as they please, even if it goes against their clear self-interest. He even says, arzularımızın çıkarımıza tamamıyla ters düşmesi de mümkün, hatta bazen zorunludur. It is possible, and sometimes even necessary, for our desires to be completely contrary to our interests. This anlaşılması şakır, hard-to-understand interest is the desire for untrammeled free will. And that completely upends centuries of thought that assumed humans would always act in their best rational self-interest. He's saying, what if we just don't want to?
Yes. This unaccounted interest isn't just a literary quirk. It's Dostoyevsky's radical pre-existentialist claim that human freedom inherently involves the right to be illogical, even self-destructive, purely to assert individuality against any rational system.
Okay.
For him, the tabiat kanunlara laws of nature and mathematical certainties like iki kere iki dört der 2 times 2 makes 4 represent a deterministic world where human actions are predictable and controllable, essentially reducing humans to cogs in a machine. They are metaphorical stone walls of certainty that imprison the human spirit.
And he expresses profound aversion to being constrained by these laws. He asks, Ya herhangi bir sebeple bu kanunlardan ve iki kere ikinin dört etmesinden hoşlanmıyorsam tabiat kanunlarından iki kere ikinin dört etmesinden bana ne? What if, for some reason, I don't like these laws and 2 times 2 makes 4? What do nature's laws or 2 times 2 makes 4 mean to me? He refuses to büsbütün boyun eğmeye, completely submit to such a tostuvar stone wall. He's fighting against the idea that we're just cogs in a cosmic machine, isn't he? That our choices are merely the result of predictable forces, rather than genuine, perhaps even irrational acts of will.
Exactly. For him, the stone wall of 2 times 2 makes 4 isn't just a mathematical fact. It's a metaphor for all the scientific and social laws, all the algorithms and data that seek to define, predict, and ultimately control human behavior.
Ah, right.
If everything about us can be quantified and predicted, where is our freedom? Where is the very essence of being human? His rebellion isn't against the truth of the statement, but against its imposition. He resents being forced to acknowledge an immutable truth if that truth denies him agency.
Okay.
And this leads to the ultimate, radical expression of his freedom, Hershey hushgermaya karaverdiknen sonna ikikeri ikinenbus edmesinden billy hushlan makmumkunder. Once I have decided to tolerate everything, it is even possible to, 2 times 2 makes 5. This isn't about mathematical literacy, obviously. It's a metaphorical demand for the right to irrationality and unpredictability, simply because he desires it, simply because he has the will to desire it, even if it's absurd.
That's a truly radical stance. So what does he believe is the true essence of human desire, then, if it's not purely logical? He claims arzu akalida başka çeşit zintileri içine alan bütün hayatın yani bir insan hayatının en kudretli ifadesidir. Desire is the most powerful expression of all life, that is, human life, embracing both reason and other aspirations. He says it's life itself, karakuku almak dedi, not extracting a square root. It's not a cold calculation.
No, he argues that desire is the full, messy, often contradictory expression of human life, not a cold logical calculation or, the extraction of a mathematical solution. The terrifying prospect for him is human beings reduced to mere piano keys, or ikideki birchivata, a cog in an organ. If all desires could be mathematically formulated and predicted by some benevolent scientific system, he asserts that humanity's true endeavor, its ongoing struggle, is to constantly prove birkavata del de insan de luklarina, that they are humans, not cogs.
Okay.
It's a continuous, defiant act of self-assertion against any system that seeks to define or predict us completely, to turn us into mere components of a larger rational machine. He believes that if you take away our capacity for illogical, even harmful desire, you take away our very humanity.
And he doesn't paint a pretty picture of human nature in this context, does he?
Not at all.
He defines humanity as iki ayaklananker birmaluktur, a two-legged, ungrateful creature. He highlights humanity's daimier demsisli, perpetual depravity, and an inherent love for yukmaya, her shekos halin getir maya bailurd, destroying, reducing everything to chaos. This is a stark contrast to any utopian ideal of human goodness. And perhaps most radically, he suggests that humans belki istataptan da aynı derecede hoşlanıyordur, hatta satarabın sadet kadar faydalı olması da mümkündür, perhaps enjoys suffering just as much. It is even possible that suffering is as useful as happiness. For him, adrakim biricik kaynağı istataptır. Suffering is the sole source of consciousness. That's a truly unsettling thought, to find value in pain.
This radical embrace of suffering is a direct counter to utopian ideals that promise endless happiness and comfort as the ultimate goals. He suggests that suffering is not merely a byproduct of existence, but an essential component of consciousness itself.
How so?
It's through suffering that we truly become aware, not only of ourselves, but of our freedom to choose, even to choose to suffer. For him, pain provides a clarity, a sharpness of perception that comfort simply dulls. It's in those moments of greatest agony that we are most keenly aware of our own existence, and paradoxically, our freedom to react to it. This is why he so vehemently rejects the Crystal Palace.
He flat out refuses the Crystal Palace. He states, "Belki biliyordan olduğu, ebediyete kadar göçmeyeceği ve karşısına geçit gizlice. Olsa dil çıkaramayacağım, için ondan çekiniyorum. Perhaps I fear it because it is crystal, because it will endure forever, and because I will not be able to stick my tongue out at it, even secretly." He can't even secretly mock it.
That's his deepest desire, a space for personal, defiant freedom, even if it's petty.
Yeah.
The Crystal Palace represents absolute perfection, a world where there is no room for dissent, no corner for a secret, contemptuous gesture. His refusal is a defense of the human capacity for irrationality and rebellion, even against a benevolent, perfectly rational system.
Right.
He uses the analogy of a chicken coop. He might enter it to avoid rain, but he won't call it a palace out of gratitude. This emphasizes his refusal to settle for convenience over authentic, albeit unfulfilled, desire. He's saying, you can offer me comfort and safety, but if I'm forced to call it a paradise, if it strips me of my right to choose something else, then it's no paradise at all.
He says, "Arzularımı yok edin. Bütün ideallerimi silin. Bana daha iyi şeyler gösterin. Seve seve peşinizden koşarım. Destroy my desires, erase all my ideals, show me better things, and I will gladly follow you."
But this is a rhetorical challenge, isn't it? He believes no better thing could truly satisfy his perverse need for self-assertion. He's basically daring anyone to create a system so perfect that it removes the very human need for rebellious, irrational desire.
It is a profound rhetorical challenge indeed. He's saying, you can't give me anything better because what I truly desire is the freedom to desire anything, even nothing, even something that harms me.
Wow.
He's convinced that any system, no matter how well-intentioned, that tries to calculate and provide for all human needs will inevitably stifle the one thing that makes us truly human, our unpredictable, often perverse free will. This philosophical stance sets the stage for his interactions with the world, which are almost always fraught with humiliation and self-sabotage.
Because his theories, brilliant and provocative as they are no match for the messy realities of social anxiety and petty humiliations that plague his everyday life. He attempts to embody his philosophy, but it almost always backfires spectacularly.
Okay, we've spent a lot of time in the abstract exploring the twisted philosophical landscape of the underground man's mind. But what happens when these ideas, this radical assertion of irrationality and contempt, collide with the messy reality of human interaction? Does he carry his philosophical banner into polite society, or does his underground just leak out in humiliating ways?
That's where the real drama unfolds. Because his theories, brilliant and provocative as they are no match for the social anxieties and petty humiliations that plague his everyday life.
Right.
He attempts to embody his philosophy, but it almost always backfires spectacularly, leading to the very self-degradation he supposedly enjoys. He describes his early alienation, wildly solitary, and his deep conviction that his colleagues looked at him with disgust. He views his colleagues as humble, lazy, indistinguishable like sheep in the same flock. He believes his morbidly emotional nature makes him unique and superior.
So he creates this rigid dichotomy himself, the hyperconscious, unique individual versus the undifferentiated, normal masses.
Exactly.
This self-perception as an outsider, despised yet superior, fuels his resentment and his awkward social interactions. He even paradoxically claims that every honest man is cowardly, slavish, and must be so.
Yeah, that's a bizarre one.
He sees bravery as a temporary facade for donkeys and those of donkey lineage, as he puts it. This is his way of rationalizing his own cowardice, isn't it? Elevating it to a universal truth for honest men.
Exactly. He retroactively justifies his own inaction and fear by declaring cowardice a moral virtue for the honest man. It's a profound act of self-deception that allows him to maintain his internal sense of superiority even as he struggles with outward acts of courage. This self-justification only gets deeper when he talks about his school years, which he calls fishikajli yalara, terrible, miserable years. He was despised, ridiculed for his physical appearance. Yuzumne, handel fukudumla hayasiska elinolerdi, they shamelessly made fun of my face and clumsy body, and constantly felt himself a stranger, alienated from his peers. This early torment, this feeling of being an outcast, clearly shaped the man he became, fueling his resentment and misanthropy.
And then there's his brief, destructive attempt at friendship. It's truly telling.
Yes, his one attempted connection, driven not by genuine affection, but by a desire to kendaimasir etmek, enslave him.
Ooh.
He reveals that once the friend was tamolila balandiktan sonra, completely attached, the narrator, ondan nefret etmeye başlayarak sırseverdim, began to hate him and turned away. This demonstrates his profound inability to sustain genuine human connection, perhaps because it threatens his cherished isolation and control.
Right, makes sense.
For him, true intimacy means vulnerability, and vulnerability is anathema to his proud, self-sufficient underground identity. He prefers to dominate or to be entirely alone.
And all these social anxieties and philosophical ideas really come to a head in the dinner party scene, which is just a microcosm of his humiliation and self-sabotage.
Oh yeah, the dinner party.
He shows up as an uninvited guest at his former schoolmate Simonov's, where they're planning a farewell dinner for Zverkov. He immediately feels like an unwelcome worthless as a fly. It's a setup for psychological warfare, really.
It is. Zverkov, in contrast, is everything the underground man despises but secretly envies. Popular, arrogant, superficial, yet effortlessly socially successful. The narrator recounts a past conflict where Zverkov, as a rich landowner, boasted about his tour de seigneur, lord's right to peasant girls, and his intention to abuse his power. The narrator opposed him, but he admits it was purely out of spite, not genuine moral outrage, because Zverkov behaved in an extremely impudent manner towards me.
So just pure spite again.
Pure spite. And the supporting cast, Fyrfiskin, his Bashtusmalimda, chief enemy and sycophant, with his simian face, and Trudolyubov, the dull, status-obsessed officer, only amplify the narrator's sense of alienation and loathing.
His pre-dinner humiliation is just excruciating to read. He arrives at the Hotel de Paris at 5 p.m. when dinner is set for 6 p.m., leading to an hour of waiting and feeling humiliated by the waiters, who glance at him with this mixture of contempt and indifference.
Right.
And then Zverkov's condescending remark, "Vazavali demek bir satir burada bekliyorsunuz." Oh, poor thing. So you've been waiting here for an hour. It's a perfect setup for his internal meltdown. He's already simmering, desperate to assert himself.
The entire dinner is just a performance of his internal chaos.
Phew.
Zverkov's feigned politeness, delivered with a general azimuthal general's pomp, contrasts sharply with his casual disdain for the underground man. The conversation quickly turns to the narrator's meager income, with Verfiskin remarking, "Bin sefalatin takendisi," in my opinion, it's utter misery. The narrator's desperate, awkward attempts to assert himself, like challenging Verfiskin to a duel, are met with derisive laughter. Duilo teklifim o kadar gulunj ve onangi halime o kararaikere kachmusholajaki hepsi dakikalarka katkala legulduler. My duel offer must have been so ridiculous and so contrary to my state at that moment that they all laughed for minutes. It's painful to read.
The internal struggle is palpable, though. He thinks, "Tam bir budala gibi davrandım, şu Verfiskin'e de amma da yüz verdim. Ahmaklar sofralarına almakla bana büyük şeref başladıklarını sanıyorlar. Asıl benim onlara şeref verdiğimi anlamıyorlar. I acted like a complete fool. I gave Verfiskin too much leeway. The fools think they've honored me by having me at their table. They don't realize I'm honoring them."
Right.
He's simultaneously aware of his foolishness and consumed by this inflated pride. Then comes his climactic speech to Zverkov, a rambling, incoherent mix of insults, pseudo-intellectualism, and forced compliments.
Oh, it's a mess.
He declares he hates basmakalıp laflarla böyleliyordun ve fazlalaştırırdımlardan. Those who talk with cliches and are too finicky, and then adds, "Sifahatin ve sifilirden nefret ederim hele sifilirden büsbütün." I hate depravity and depraved people, especially depraved people. This, of course, just leads to more ridicule and his eventual retreat into humiliated silence.
It's a masterful depiction of self-sabotage. He tries to assert his individuality and intellectual superiority, but his efforts are so clumsy and contradictory that they only result in further humiliation. His final, desperate act of defiance at the dinner is to refuse to leave, even as they ignore him.
Oh, yeah, that part.
He paces for 3 hours, Masaila Sobarasan de Volta at Yordam, pacing between the table and the stove, trying to make his presence felt, trying to impose his unwanted presence on them, only to be completely overlooked. It's the ultimate humiliation to be treated as invisible.
That's truly an agonizing scene. But then he experiences this moment of supposed victory in the duel with the officer, though it's not really a duel in the traditional sense, more a battle of wills on Petersburg Street.
Right, the Nevsky Prospect incident.
It begins with a seemingly minor incident where a tall officer casually moves him out of the way on Nevsky Prospect. This act of being treated as invisible, "Bir cynic kadar diğer vermediler," they didn't value me as much as a fly, wounded his hudutsuz gururum, boundless pride, more deeply than any physical blow.
This minor slight becomes an all-consuming obsession, fueling years of brooding. He collects information about the officer, even writes a satirical story about him that is, ironically, rejected.
Of course it is.
His boundless pride is so wounded that he conceives an elaborate, almost insane scheme to collide with the officer on Nevsky Prospect, refusing to yield ground. He meticulously prepares for this trivial act of defiance, which he considers a matter of life and death.
It's crazy.
He obtains new, dignified clothes, black gloves, a good hat, and crucially replaces his uyuz grakunun, mangy raccoon, fur collar, with a more respectable kuduzyaka, beaver collar, even borrowing money from his superior, Antony Satoskin, for this seemingly insignificant expenditure. This highlights the immense psychological importance he attaches to such a petty act of assertion.
It's insane the lengths he goes to for such a petty act of defiance, and yet it's so relatable in its absurdity, that desperate need to be seen, to be acknowledged. He experiences numerous failed attempts where his tabansizlim tutu cowardice seized me at the last moment, causing him to swerve aside. He even experiences extreme physical manifestations of his anxiety, including hastalanib humayat tuldum cycladum, getting sick with fever, raving. His obsession becomes physically debilitating, showing the profound impact of his internal conflicts.
But then there's the moment of victory. Accidentally, yet decisively, he finally collides with the officer.
Bir adım bile çekilmeden, onu işitemişim gibi yürüyüp çıktım. Without retreating a single step, I walked past him as if I were his equal.
Finally.
His overwhelming sense of triumph is immediate and intense. He returns home feeling pak memnundum zafirkos very pleased, with the elation of victory, singing Italian arias, basking in his self-proclaimed triumph over the indifferent world. For a fleeting moment, he is a hero in his own mind. But like all his triumphs, it's ephemeral, isn't it? The source notes that we won't discuss his state 3 days later, implying he's right back in his underground state, showing how fleeting his moments of assertive action truly are. He can't sustain that feeling of victory. It never lasts.
No, it doesn't. And this brings us to the Liza episode, his final and perhaps most devastating social encounter, an attempt at a twisted form of redemption that utterly collapses under the weight of his contradictions. After his social humiliation, he returns to intense isimsikuliordu, boredom, and pishmanlik remorse. This leads him back to his familiar escape, a world of hayal alamende yashardum fantasy world.
Ah, the fantasy world again.
Yes. He has this rigid self-perception. Yakarman yadakamurdan, ikisinin ortasa yoktu. Either a hero or from mud, there was no middle ground. He finds comfort in believing that even in degradation, he is a Karaman merely hidden in the mud, waiting to emerge.
He describes elaborate, purely imaginary ashkmachavalaya love adventures, where he is always the triumphant hero, a benevolent poet, a rich benefactor, or a military conqueror.
Right.
He explicitly states these were tamamila hayali, her hangi kan lova verlikvel gisi almayanashklaran, entirely imaginary, having no connection to any living being, so satisfying that he felt no need for real love. These fantasies are his coping mechanism, a way to escape the crushing reality of his squalid existence.
But this fragile world of self-delusion is violently shattered when he decides to visit a brothel after the dinner party, driven by kansakuntusu boredom and a desire for sefilia bashvuryordum, recourse to depravity.
Right.
It's not about desire. It's about a further plunge into self-degradation, a perverse attempt to prove his own wretchedness. There, he encounters Liza.
He's immediately intrigued by Liza, noting her youth, pallor, her kashlari lachidis, sanki hired dolu bakusha, straight, dark eyebrows and serious, almost astonished gaze, and her overall innocence in such a place. He sees her not as a human being, but as a potential subject for his perverse need to save someone, a chance to play the hero he only is in his fantasies.
And this is where his manipulative salvation lecture begins. A verbose, theatrical, kitap gibi konuşuyorsun, you talk like a book sermon. He paints a horrifying picture of her inevitable degradation, falling to worse brothels, succumbing to disease, varium consumption, and dying alone in the desolate Sinai slums. He even provides a vivid, nauseating anecdote of the Tuzlu Balikli Kadın, woman with assaulted flesh, who was beaten, half-naked, and begging, a grotesque image of what awaits Liza.
Horrible.
He tells Liza, "Senin için de bir bodrum köşesinde verimden ölüp gitmek en iyisi. It's best for you two to die of consumption in a basement corner." He uses every rhetorical trick to break her spirit, to crush her hopes, to make her feel the full weight of her degradation.
In stark contrast to that bleak future, he describes this idyllic family life, overflowing with saccharine sentimentality. A loving husband, happy children, Tokuk Dunyanyan and Büyük Saadetidir, children are the greatest, happiest in the world. Mutual respect, forgiveness after arguments, the sacredness of married love. He even speculates, "Bir kızım olsaydı, onu oğullarımdan daha çok sevirdim. If I had a daughter, I think I would love her more than my sons." He, who despises sentimentality and human connection, paints this sugary picture. It's a calculated performance designed to break her down and elicit a particular response.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
He then attacks her current existence, emphasizing her enslavement, the sale of her soul and body, the meaninglessness of her love, and the contempt of her clients. Bütün bu samura bulanmış malukların hakareti de dünyanın en adi en iğrenç hakaretidir. The insults of these creatures smeared in mud are the most vile, most disgusting insults in the world.
Wow.
He's not genuinely trying to save her. He's trying to assert his intellectual and moral superiority, to play God with her fate. He wants to witness her suffering and feel powerful in causing it.
And it works. Liza experiences a profound emotional breakdown, hiding her face in the pillow, her body shaking with sobs, trying to stifle her cries and biting her hand in despair. She is utterly broken by his words. Then, in a pivotal moment of vulnerability and hope, she shows him a love letter from a young student, a symbol of genuine, pure affection and a stark contrast to the depravity he has just described.
Write the letter.
She reveals her true hope for a different life, having only recently arrived at the brothel and intending to leave.
This is the moment where Liza's vulnerability and genuine hope pierce through his cynical facade. challenging his carefully constructed narrative of human depravity. Her simple act of trust, her innocent desire for a better life, shatters his manipulative game. It makes his subsequent actions even more reprehensible because she represents the very authenticity and hope he has denied in himself.
The morning after is truly the collapse of his intentions and the brutal reality of his underground existence. He wakes to immediate remorse and panic, realizing the taskin do gularma o peclisum sus facia sanalarila yirek parcelamalada. Excessive emotions, those utterly unnecessary tragic scenes and heart-wrenching moments of the previous night.
Yeah, the shame kicks in.
He's filled with shame and anxiety about Liza actually visiting his squalid home, seeing him in his true, pathetic state.
His obsessive worry centers on Liza seeing his Sefil beer-hulled, miserable state and his Pasavra Sabalim ragged dressing gown. He thinks, ugh, Nerzik, oh, what a disgrace.
Right.
It's less about Liza's feelings and more about his own image, his profound shame at being exposed for the pathetic creature he truly is, stripped of his intellectual pretensions. This scene also highlights his long-standing, humiliating relationship with Apollon, his old, proud, disdainful servant.
Ah, Apollon.
Whom he describes as Kanranan Banalaya Gurdu Birjeza, a punishment God deemed fit for me. Apollon is the silent, judging presence, a constant reminder of his own powerlessness.
Apollon is a character in himself. He details Apollon's passive-aggressive tactics, silent, critical stares, slow movements, and peculiar habits, like reading psalms in a voice, like a death vigil. The narrator tries to assert power by withholding Apollon's wages as a show of dominance, but Apollon, with his unflappable dignity, inevitably triumphs. This domestic struggle is a microcosm of his larger failures to assert control in the world.
This is the setup for the climactic public humiliation. Liza walks in on the narrator trying pathetically to assert dominance over Apollon, calling him a Kani, criminal, and theatrically withholding his pay, only for Apollon to remain calmly defiant, knowing he will eventually get his due.
Perfect timing.
Liza witnesses his pathetic, frantic state, dressed in his wretched dressing gown, begging Apollon to fetch tea and crackers. He tries to appear authoritative, standing "Kolerema ela Napoleon bir gerkameka bushtrarak," with arms crossed ela Napoleon grandly, but his face is pale and sweating, betraying his inner turmoil.
It's absolute mortification, the ultimate exposure of his true powerlessness and petty cruelty towards Apollon. The question he poses to Liza after Apollon finally leaves perfectly encapsulates his deepest fear, his profound vulnerability. You despise me, don't you, Liza? He needs to know if she sees him for what he truly is, a powerless, self-loathing man, not the intellectual giant or heroic savior he pretends to be.
And in that moment, Liza, instead of despising him, she embraces him, not with lust, but with pity and compassion. But his immense pride cannot bear this genuine human connection. He repays her compassion with an act of ultimate cruelty. He shoves money into her hand, trying to reduce their encounter to a transactional exchange, denying the very humanity and vulnerability she offered him.
Oh, no.
This final act of self-sabotage drives her away, proving his inability to accept genuine connection or vulnerability, ultimately reaffirming his chosen path of the underground. He is trapped in his own perverse logic.
So what does this all mean in the end? The underground man's notes are ultimately a perverse act of self-writing, aren't they? He confesses, I don't believe a single word of what I've scribbled. But then he immediately contradicts himself. Or rather, perhaps I do believe, but somehow I feel my words are lies. Like a peddler trying to sell bad goods, and I writhe in doubt.
This highlights his unreliable narration and the performative, self-deceptive nature of his confession. He's not truly seeking absolution or understanding. He's performing his misery, even to himself, endlessly dissecting his own thoughts without resolution.
Right.
He says he writes to De Fedicemi in Aniorum, believe he will repel haunting memories, and to find Bircheshid Federlich a kind of relief. Yet the act itself seems to deepen his boredom and self-loathing. The writing becomes another form of his torment, a futile cycle of self-analysis, an intellectual treadmill that leads nowhere.
It's the paradox of articulation. He concludes that Bevezlik, Theodorusu, Elekle, Sutashimak, Hazeki Adaman Kadarin Yazilidir, Talkativeness, or rather carrying water with a sieve, is the fate of every intelligent man.
Hmm.
He is condemned to endless, futile self-analysis, always pouring out words, but never truly filling his emptiness or resolving his contradictions. He is a prophet of paradox, forever stuck in his self-made intellectual prison.
And this character, the underground man, remains such a timeless archetype. His internal struggles, his contradictions, his resentment, and his radical desire for irrational freedom resonate deeply with universal human experiences.
Yeah, they really do.
He is a precursor to existentialist thought, highlighting the alienation of the modern intellectual who feels detached from a world increasingly ordered by systems and logic. He shows us the deep human need to assert individuality, even if it leads to self-destruction.
And his arguments against absolute rationality, scientific determinism, and utopian ideals remain powerfully relevant today, don't they?
Absolutely. In a world increasingly driven by data, algorithms, and the pursuit of efficiency, he forces us to question whether true human flourishing can ever be fully quantified or predicted. He's still sticking his tongue out at the Crystal Palace, even now, daring us to consider the value of the irrational and unpredictable. He dares us to consider the value of the irrational, the unpredictable, and even the self-destructive in defining what it means to be human. He suggests that the very insistence on free will, even when it leads to suffering, is a vital part of our humanity, a defiance against being reduced to a mere piano key in some grand deterministic symphony.
Right.
He forces us to ask, what if our greatest freedom isn't found in what we choose to do, but in our defiant ability to choose not to do what is expected of us, purely to assert our individual will?
So after this deep dive into the underground man's mind, what do you think? Is his seemingly absurd insistence on free will, even at the cost of his own happiness and sanity, is that a tragic flaw, or is it the very definition of what it means to be truly human?
A big question.
And how much of our own rational behavior is perhaps driven by a hidden, contradictory desire for something unprofitable, purely to assert our individual will? Maybe, just maybe, like the underground man, our greatest freedom lies not in what we choose to do, but in our defiant ability to choose not to do what is expected of us.